The first time Grace Holloway asked for a hug, she didn't whisper it like a shy child. She said it like someone standing at the edge of a cliff, trying not to fall. Her clothes were too thin for the cold, her hair was tied back with a worn ribbon, and her eyes looked older than any girl's eyes should ever look. She stood outside a grocery store in Cleveland, Ohio, holding a small plastic bag with 2 bruised apples inside, like they were treasures. People walked past her like she was part of the sidewalk, but when she saw Noah Carter, she didn't look away. She didn't beg for money. She didn't ask for food. She only said the words that cracked something inside him. "Can you give me a hug, please?" And the reaction of that single father, strong, tired, and already carrying too much, left the poor girl in tears before he even touched her. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the kind of love that can change a life, then please like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to the channel. Because stories like this remind us that humanity is still alive. Noah Carter wasn't the kind of man who cried easily. He was the kind of man who learned to swallow grief so he could pack lunches, fold tiny socks, and keep the lights on. At 34, he already looked like someone who had lived 2 lifetimes. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier after a sudden illness, leaving him with a 6-year-old son, Caleb, and a home full of silence that no amount of television noise could fix. Noah worked as a delivery driver during the day and stocked shelves at night when bills stacked up like threats. He didn't have the luxury of falling apart. He had to be both mother and father, comfort and discipline, laughter and strength. That afternoon, he'd stopped at the grocery store after a long shift, his hands still smelling faintly of cardboard and fuel. He was thinking about what he could afford, which coupons might work, and how he could stretch his paycheck until Friday. His world was already heavy, until he saw the girl near the entrance, standing like she didn't belong anywhere else. Grace wasn't holding a sign. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't chasing strangers. She simply watched people with the stillness of someone who had learned that asking too loudly could make things worse. Her cheeks were red from the wind. Her shoes looked a size too small, and her bag of bruised apples made Noah's stomach twist, because he knew what hunger looked like. He'd seen it in Caleb's eyes once when he'd had to water down soup and pretend it was normal. Noah tried to keep walking. He told himself he couldn't save everyone. He told himself he had his own child to protect. But then Grace stepped closer, not blocking his path, not demanding anything, just close enough that he could see the tremble in her hands. When she asked for a hug, Noah froze so hard it was like time stopped. His first reaction wasn't anger, it was fear. Not fear of her, but fear of what her request meant. A hug wasn't money. A hug wasn't food. A hug was something deeper. It meant she wasn't only hungry in her stomach, she was starving in her soul. Noah's mind raced with warnings the world had taught him. Don't touch strangers. Don't get involved. People will misunderstand. Someone could accuse you. Someone could record you. Someone could ruin you. And yet, in front of him stood a child who looked like she'd been invisible for too long. Noah took a step back without thinking, his shoulders tightening, his face turning cautious. Grace saw that movement like a slap. Her eyes widened, and the courage that had pushed her to speak collapsed in 1 second. She nodded quickly, embarrassed, biting her lip like she'd done something wrong. Tears filled her eyes as if they'd been waiting for this exact moment. Noah didn't know her story, but he knew pain. He knew what it felt like to reach out and be met with distance. He knew what it felt like to need warmth and receive cold rules instead. His wife, Rachel, had been the kind of person who hugged without hesitation. She had believed that love was something you gave freely, even if it cost you comfort. And suddenly Noah remembered how Rachel used to stop for strangers, how she'd speak gently to homeless men like they were neighbors, how she'd say, "Noah, kindness is never wasted." That memory hit him so hard it made his chest ache. He looked at Grace again and realized her tears weren't just sadness, they were humiliation. It wasn't about the hug anymore. It was about being rejected like she wasn't worth even a moment of care. Noah swallowed, took a slow breath, and forced his fear to sit behind his humanity. He crouched down so he was eye level with her, careful and calm. He didn't grab her, he didn't rush. He simply opened his arms the way a safe person does, the way a father does when a child is hurt. Grace hesitated, as if she didn't trust good things anymore. Then she stepped into him, small and fragile, and the second Noah wrapped his arms around her, she broke. Her sobs weren't pretty or quiet. They were raw, shaking cries that came from a place too deep for words. She clutched the back of his jacket like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. Noah held her gently, feeling how thin she was, feeling her ribs under her coat, feeling the desperate need in her trembling body. People walked by, some staring, some judging, some pretending not to notice. Noah didn't care. For the first time in years, he didn't care what strangers thought. He cared about the child in his arms who had asked for the simplest thing in the world and almost didn't get it. When Grace finally pulled back, she wiped her face quickly, ashamed of crying. Noah noticed the bruises on her wrists, faint marks like someone had grabbed her too hard. He noticed the exhaustion behind her eyes. He asked softly where her parents were, and her gaze dropped to the ground. She didn't answer right away. She looked around like she was afraid of being overheard. Then she told him in broken pieces, the way children reveal painful truths without fully understanding how terrible they sound. Her mother had been struggling for years, drifting from one motel to another, sometimes disappearing for days. Her father wasn't around. Sometimes men came and went. Sometimes food ran out. Sometimes Grace slept in the car. Sometimes she stayed with strangers who promised help and delivered fear. The bruises weren't accidents. They were reminders of how unsafe her world had become. That day, her mother had told her to wait outside while she went inside somewhere, and she hadn't returned. Grace had been waiting for hours, too scared to leave, too hungry to stand still, and too lonely to keep breathing without breaking. Noah's heart pounded as he listened. He thought of Caleb at home, safe in his small bedroom with superhero sheets. He thought of the way Caleb complained when his cereal didn't have enough sugar, and how Noah would laugh because it was such an innocent problem. Grace didn't have innocent problems. Grace had survival problems. Noah stood slowly, his mind fighting itself. He didn't want to call the police and scare her. He didn't want to walk away and abandon her. He didn't want to bring her into danger or cause trouble for his own son. But he also knew that if he turned his back, he might be turning his back on a child who would not make it through another winter. He took her inside the store, bought her a warm meal, and watched her eat like someone who didn't know when the next bite would come. He called a local family services number he'd once seen on a flyer at Caleb's school. While waiting, he wrapped his own scarf around her neck. Grace kept glancing at him like she couldn't understand why he was still there. When the social worker arrived, a kind woman named Mary Ann, with tired eyes and a gentle voice, Grace flinched, expecting to be taken away like luggage. But Noah stayed beside her, steady as a wall. He told Mary Ann everything, including the bruises. He insisted Grace needed safety, not punishment. He asked if there was any emergency foster placement. Mary Ann explained the system was overwhelmed, shelters were crowded, and the wait lists were long. She offered temporary options, but none sounded like warmth. None sounded like home. That night, Noah did something he never imagined doing. He brought Grace to his house, legally and carefully, with Mary Ann's guidance and emergency paperwork. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a safe place for now. When Caleb saw Grace at the door, he stared with wide curiosity. Noah introduced her gently, explaining she needed help. Caleb didn't ask complicated questions. He just walked up and offered Grace one of his stuffed animals like it was the most natural thing in the world. Grace took it with trembling hands, and tears returned to her eyes. Not the broken kind this time, but the stunned kind. The kind that happens when you realize kindness still exists. Days turned into weeks. Noah learned that helping someone wasn't a one-time heroic moment. It was constant work. Grace had nightmares. She would wake up shaking, certain she was going to be dragged back into chaos. She hoarded food at first, hiding crackers under her pillow, afraid the kitchen would vanish. She apologized for everything. If she dropped a spoon, she apologized. If she laughed too loud, she apologized. Noah never yelled. He stayed patient, even when his own exhaustion screamed at him. He arranged therapy through community programs. He spoke with school counselors. He kept records. He followed every legal step, even when it was complicated. He wanted to protect her the right way. And slowly, Grace began to soften. She began to trust. She began to smile without checking if it was allowed. One evening, as winter deepened and snow coated the sidewalks, Noah found Grace sitting on the couch holding a framed photo of Rachel. She didn't know Noah was watching. Her fingers traced the edges carefully, like she was touching someone sacred. When Noah sat beside her, she whispered that Rachel looked kind. Noah's throat tightened. He told Grace Rachel had been kind, and that she would have loved her. Grace stared at him for a long moment, then leaned into his side like it was the safest place in the world. Noah didn't realize he was crying until his tears fell onto his own hands. For years, grief had been locked inside him like a sealed room. But Grace, this child who had asked for a hug, had opened that door without trying. She had reminded him that love didn't die. It transforms. It returns in unexpected ways. Months later, after hearings and paperwork and the kind of slow, painful process that comes with the system, Noah was granted the right to become Grace's legal guardian. It wasn't a perfect ending. Grace still carried scars. Noah still carried grief. But the house no longer felt empty. It felt alive. Caleb and Grace became inseparable, like siblings stitched together by fate. The fridge stayed full, the lights stayed on, and laughter returned, not the forced kind, but the real kind that fills rooms like sunlight. Near the end of that year, Noah took both kids back to the same grocery store where it had all started. Grace wore a warm coat now. Her hair was neatly braided. Her cheeks were healthy and pink. She held a small bag of apples again, but this time they were bright and fresh. She stood by the entrance for a moment, staring at the spot where she had once been invisible. Noah watched her quietly, letting her face the memory. Grace turned to him, eyes shining, and wrapped her arms around him without asking. Noah hugged her back with the strength of someone who understood what that moment meant. It wasn't just a hug, it was a promise, a rescue, a second chance. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like this video, subscribe, and share it, because the world needs more reminders that love can still win, even in the coldest places. And before the ending, I have one special request. Comment hug if you believe one small act of kindness can save a life. That day, Grace didn't cry because she was rejected. She cried because she was finally chosen. And Noah, the single dad who once feared getting involved, learned something that changed him forever. Sometimes the biggest miracles don't come from money or power. Sometimes they come from a tired man stopping in the middle of his hard life and opening his arms.